Hello and welcome. So today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a book that has influenced me a great deal, Gödel, Escher, Bach by Douglas Hofstadter. And in his book, he talks about the liar's paradox, which is something I've used quite a bit in a number of my paintings. And I'd like to go into detail about how I've used those things and directly applied it. The basic form of the liar's paradox, or a simple form of it that's most commonly described by Hofstadter, is this sentence is false. And in order for you to understand the paradox here, essentially the structure of any sentence, we tend to assume that the intention of the person making the statement is intending that statement to be true. So there's an initial implied truth to the statement. And in this statement, it refers to itself. And so by saying this sentence, it's pointing to itself, essentially. So this is the most condensed version of a strange loop or a paradox, with how directly it refers to itself in a very closed loop. But you assume that it's true at the outset based on our assumption about sentences. And if you're to believe that the sentence is true, then you also believe it's what it is actually saying about itself, which is that it's false. And of course, if you believe that the statement is false, then once again, you believe that it's true. When you describe it, I think from the outside, it's actually best for you to actually think through step by step and allowing yourself to feel and understand the truth and then the falsity and how that loops back and forth step by step. But you can also look at this particular paradox and you can separate it out into more parts and make it not quite so direct. So you can say the following sentence is false, and that points to this next sentence, which will say the previous statement is true. So the first sentence points to the second one. There's nothing problematic about that first sentence, the following sentence is false. That in itself is not paradoxical, but it points to the next sentence, and that says the previous sentence is true. And that second sentence points back to the first sentence. Now, the coupling of those two sentences together and how they point to one another is a problem in terms of logic. It does create a paradox within how those things point to one another. So I find that very interesting because you can you can have as many parts as you want. You could have a book, let's say, where the first sentence says, the first sentence on the very first page says, the sentence on the following page is true. And then you could go through, 100 or 200 pages, and each page on every side of every page might say, the following page has a sentence that is true, until you get to the very, very last page in the book, and it says, the first sentence in this book is false. So if that were the case, you could have, if you had 100 pages, you could have one page that says the first sentence is false, and then you've got a book that is a really interesting skew, because that would be a book that is 99% true, but 1% false. But all it takes is that one page, that one thing, to make the entirety a total paradox and derail the truth of the entire thing. So that's a really intriguing point to me, because a percentage of something, we often think that, oh, okay, well, if we've got it 99% right, we're basically right. Well, rightness, it doesn't matter how much you split it out. You can, if you have that one thing that derails that in a complex system, points to the first page and says it's false, then the whole thing is screwed. So I don't know. I think that's kind of an interesting idea to think about, because it can kind of change our perspective on truth. So here's a painting that I did that is dealing with a similar sort of structure. So Truth and false are these just binary dichotomy. And so with paradox, basically you just need a dichotomy or a contradiction of opposition. So in this painting, I was dealing with the concept of luck and thinking about lucky and unlucky sides. There's a potential within any wishbone that you have the potential of a positive or negative depending on which you pull. So you'll have a lucky side or an unlucky side. Now, in where I have the break here, that short side, where it's short, would be a negative side. But then in this particular painting, I decided to have it branch off into a new wishbone within a kind of a fractal wishbone, if you will. And that has the potential for both positive and negative on the next pull. So you know that it has that next positive and negative potential, but that's encompassed within the negative potential that just happened before it. But when you look at this overall structure, if you were to think that every time you got a short end, and it was like a negative, if you had a new branching point for a new potential, that would ultimately be a very, very positive structure because you could just keep pulling. And I actually believe that that's the way life is. You make the pull and maybe it's lucky, maybe it's not, but it always leads to the next time to pull that next wishbone. So this is an example where I tied basically a philosophical belief that I generally have, although I get discouraged oftentimes and don't always live by some of my beliefs. But generally speaking, it ties in this paradoxical structure with a philosophy that I try to abide by. Now, in the next painting I'd like to show you, this is a painting where it's a very similar structure in essence. I have this unicycle. It's sort of a tandem unicycle of sorts, and with a unicycle, if you've ever ridden a unicycle, it has the potential to either go one direction or the other way. If you are trying to do both simultaneously, you're just going to fall over. So you're going to have to pick a direction. But then, of course, in this painting, I've allowed the seat to branch off into two different seats that are facing in oppositional directions. And you can imagine the sitters that maybe you have two sitters and they could be potentially facing each other, which if you are facing each other in this close proximity, it would be a very intimate situation. But then, of course, it's very problematic for a variety of reasons. How does this actually work? There's only two pedals, so who's going to be doing the pedaling and which direction are they going to be going? But here we have that essential same structure where essentially for this type of Lair's paradox, which is akin to the second version that I showed you earlier, you have two parts that are pointing in opposite directions that are encompassed within a broader direction that's one way or the other way. Or rather, you can look at this as binaries, where you have a simultaneity of binaries on one layer of hierarchy that are encompassed with a higher level of hierarchy that's going one way or the other, and that creates paradox.